Hello everyone, it's me, Clayton. I just got back from watching Onward, starring Tom Holland, Chris Pratt, Octavia Spencer, and others, in Pixar's latest fantasy film that definitely takes a different look in terms of magic and dungeon crawling. So, it definitely ends up being not the best Pixar film, but certainly a good film in its own right. Well, let's get to the story, shall we? The story is about Ian and Barley Lightfoot, played by Tom Holland and Chris Pratt. They're a pair of brothers who live with their mother in a world that used to be filled with magic and adventure and wonder straight out of Dungeons and Dragons, that is since modernized into essentially present day, but with fantasy creatures. But the two of them discover that their father, who has since passed away, has left a staff along with a magic item that can bring him back for an entire day. But when Ian ends up screwing up the spell, he returns as only a pair of legs, and they have to find another magic item in order to bring the rest of him back before the time runs out. So that's basically the story, and I definitely feel that it feels like an Amblin, Steven Spielberg kind of premise, mixing in the supernatural and the magical with the relatable and the human. Essentially, it's something that Pixar has been capable of doing for many of their films, and I definitely like the fact that it's focused on brotherhood in this case. Ian and Barley, of course, are two very different kinds of characters. Ian being the very typical Pixar hero, sort of mild-mannered and timid at the start, but it grows more confident and more and stands up more for himself as the film goes on. And Barley is essentially a fantasy nerd who happens to take the at times obnoxious but well-meaning older brother trope to the expected results. And while they are typical characters, both Chris Pratt and Tom Holland deliver excellent performances that help them become quite likable. The mother is also quite likable herself, not only in trying to look after her boys, but also in various ways that she injects humor and heart into almost every single scenario. But probably my favorite character is the Manticore, played by Octavia Spencer, who goes from being an amazing warrior with wings to running a family restaurant where her famous adventurer's tavern used to be. It's actually a pretty funny gag, and they use it well. Other things that are done well are, of course, the animation. This is a Pixar movie, after all, so, of course, it looks absolutely gorgeous. Mixing in the modern-day suburban lives with the fantasy elements of the creatures that walk around, like centaurs and ogres, and even giant gelatinous cubes straight out of Wayne's World. And all these elements do feel like a mishmash at first, but they actually do work together to make a rather interesting world that I actually wouldn't mind seeing more explored more. But if this is just a standalone film, that would be fine, considering that the story does happen to go through not only the history of this world, but also keeps things focused with the brothers, their father, and the people that surround their lives. On top of that, there's also a Simpsons short that plays before the film, because Disney owns The Simpsons now, about Maggie falling in love with a baby boy, and I do think that it's kind of odd to see The Simpsons before this film, but the short worked well, and it reminded me of why I love The Simpsons to begin with. But back to Onward, it's definitely very typical when it comes to how predictable the film is, however. You can basically see several of the plot points, including the emotional scenes, the comedic bits, and even the giant action scene at the end, coming from a mile away, but like with the greatest adventures, it's not exactly about the end destination, it's about the journey. And the journey itself is handled fairly well. It's definitely not one of Pixar's best films, but it's far from their worst, and I do think that if you are a fan of their previous adventures, this one should certainly entertain and satisfy you. So I'll give Onward a 7.5 out of 10. See you next time.